turn it over to Z.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How are we doing? Good. How was dinner? Was it good? Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne, for catering. All right, so my topic tonight is going to be historical fashion in Calaveras County. I'm really excited to be kicking off the 2024 dinner season with this presentation. I've worked really hard on it since November, and I'm really excited to bring it to you guys. A little bit about me. I'm a graduate of Columbia College in Sonora. I graduated with 2 associate's degrees for transfer in history and anthropology last April. I am a lover of anything vintage, antique, clothing, fashion, and in that same token, I'm an actor here at the Fourth Wall Entertainment at the Met. And we do a lot of period pieces, so I get to play with a lot of fun clothing, and that was kind of my step into this world of vintage fashion. I'm also a research and office assistant at CCHS, as Christopher mentioned. I just wanted to point out some of these pictures down here. On the far left, we have a picture of our cast of Shakespeare, where we did a lot of Shakespearean clothing. The next one is from a production of The Moors that we did in Murphy's Creek. And that is kind of in the same token of Emily Dickinson and Charlotte Bronte and that kind of era of clothing. So that clothing is a lot more similar to what we're going to be talking about tonight. And then, of course, I do sometimes do 1950s, 1940s. You might have seen me here doing a Maryland cabaret or out at the fairgrounds singing with a maze. And those are always so much fun to get into costume and sing. So tonight, as Christopher mentioned, all of the clothing that you are seeing tonight has been checked meticulously by myself and Lauren, our historical costuming consultant. Preservation of these artifacts are of the utmost importance. I did not want to send our models down the runway in anything that was in danger of being destroyed, because if we destroy it, then we don't have it, and that really is sad. So nothing you see tonight is in danger of being damaged. Some of the items I've purchased myself as far as undergarments goes, so corsets, shoes, and some of the more exciting, fun bustles that you will be seeing I purchased myself. So let's go ahead and get started with ye old unmentionables. So underwear changed a lot during the time period that I'm covering in from 1850 to 1915. So we have a pretty standard amount of undergarments, which includes corsets, crinolines, bustles, petticoats, chemist shifts combos, and drawers. So corsets, they were originally with straps. In the 1860s, they became strapless until the turn of the century when the straps returned. Crinolines, they've originally referred to a stiff petticoat made with horsehair. And a petticoat is an underskirt that they would have worn underneath all of their other clothes. It became a cage crinoline or a hoop skirt in 1856. You can see Jill walking down the runway in her hoop skirt. That's what those would have looked like. Crinolines fell out of fashion in the 1870s and the petticoats returned. But they were replaced with this object called a bustle. You'll see our model in the back, Shug, is wearing a lobster tail bustle. That they're called that because, well, they look like a lobster tail. Bustles emerged in the 1870s as a simple bump pad, which is what Jolie in the middle is wearing. They got larger, as you can see, the lobster tail. They shrunk again in the 1880s and then disappeared almost completely in the 1890s to be replaced again with the bump pad. The petticoats include underskirts. There were multiple layers until the hoop skirt was introduced in 1856. Like I said, the petticoats reappeared in the 1890s. The chemist shifts and combinations, these are all cotton or linen undergarments. They would have been worn underneath all undergarments. Sometimes it included a full dress, sometimes it was just a top, and sometimes it had attached legs. There's a mannequin up at the bar that has an example of a combo and a wire mesh bustle. So on your way out tonight, make sure you take a look at it. It's really cool. And then drawers. You might have seen these on the models. They were those weird pants with a split down the middle. They're linen or cotton pants or shorts that were worn underneath petticoats, crinoline. They were essentially old-timey panties. And they were split in the middle to aid with the ease of going to the bathroom. Yeah. Because, you didn't want to go to the bathroom with the hoop skirt. So our first era that we're going to be talking about tonight is 1850 to 1869. This is the era of Western expansion and the Civil War years. Some of the major events that happened during this time period, of course, in 1850, California becomes a state. In 1857, there was a panic. It was a minor financial crisis that kind of affected the entire world. And it was caused because the gold that they were finding in the West was starting to dwindle. The Homestead Act of 1862 was passed, which encouraged the development of the West. We had a lot of immigration into California during this time period. The Civil War in 1861 to 1865. In 1862 was the Great Flood. It was the largest flood in recorded history in California, Oregon, and Nevada. It was weeks of nonstop rain and snow from November 1861 to January 1862. As a result of this flood, 1% of California's population passed away. So this was a major, major event. The 1865, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated following the Civil War. And then also in 1865, Mark Twain's celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County is first published. Shortly after that, Bret Hart's The Luck of Roaring Camp is first published. And then in 1869, the first transcontinental railroad is completed, and that really increased travel, especially out here. So our first kind of set of photos here, I want to talk about the large hoop skirts. Large hoop skirts or bell-shaped skirts were really in fashion. The skirts were relatively smooth. They didn't have a lot of pleating. There was sometimes pleating, but it wasn't super common. The skirts were usually just straight, as we see with Agnes Dean McCarty at the fourth picture here, and then also Lucy Kendall Beardsley in the second picture. By 1860, the skirt's volume moved to the back, and it flattened in the front to create a train shape. And often the sleeves were wide, belled, with their undershirt poking out. They were a 3/4 sleeve sometimes, but if they went all the way down to the wrist, it would have been a straight sleeve and tightened at the wrist. They wore lace and crochet collars with a round neck, as you can see in that first picture with Elizabeth Ellis. They had a round neck with no collar, or for young women, off the shoulder was another very popular style of clothing. The bodice and the skirt were meant to be one piece, or it was a single complete dress. One of the dresses you're seeing later tonight is an example of one complete dress. But if it was two separate pieces, they were meant to look as one. They were often belted to create that kind of image of a seamless dress, so it used to hide the seam. From our collection, we first have Shug coming out in an 1850s work dress. She is wearing a work dress in light blue floral linen. It has horizontal stripes in white. The collar and sleeves are trimmed with a very deep blue-black velvet. The shoulders are trimmed with black fringe. There are 10 iridescent ball buttons down the front. And something that's really, really interesting about this piece is that it's lined with flour sacks. So if you look on the inside, you can see the design of an orange logo that they would have used to line the inside of this dress. So you can see how the early pioneers were using anything they could get their hands on to make clothing out of. Next up, we're going to have Jolie. Jolie is wearing an 1850s work dress also. But she also has a 19th century apron with crochet trim. Her work dress is a partially faded blue dress with white polka dots. There is a lace detail around the collar and also strips of silk that decorate the nape of the neck. There is a cream modesty cover over her chest because women of that time period would not have been exposing that much chest. And her white cotton apron has a crochet floral trim. Something that's really interesting about crochet even today is that it is a very intricate process, and you cannot replicate it by machine. So when you see crochet even today, you know it was handmade because machines can't recreate a crochet pattern. So when you see knit, it could be machine made, but with crochet even today all the way back, it is handmade. The next period that I would like to talk about is 1870 to 1889. This is the post-Civil War and industrialization era. Some of the major events in this time period is that the United States celebrates its 100th birthday in 1876. And then in the mid-1880s was the Depression of 1882 to 1885. This was caused by a decrease in railroad construction and related jobs that resulted in low wages. It also included a year when many factories and mines decreased production or shuttered entirely. At this time, 1 million Americans were unemployed, which was a huge number for America. Another event that happened during this time period is 1886 to 1887 is the Big Die-Up. This is a winter season that ended the era of mass open-range cattle ranching. It was an unusually large amount of snowfall and extremely cold temps. It ended up killing many humans and many animals. The few cattle that remained after this winter were unhealthy, starved, and frostbit, so it caused a meat shortage that year. The skirts in this era were beginning to slim even further than they did in the previous era. They were replaced with a pitcher shape with longer trains, and you can see that in the first two pictures of Sarah Weber and Annie Sletton. You can see that their skirt kind of drapes off like a waterfall. Pleats become more common design features in the skirts. They were decorative. It was a way to break up the fabric and make it look like you were wearing something really fancy. They also had a lot of draped sections in the front. You can see Mrs. Gardola in the third picture. She has a drape across the front of her skirt. And this actually would have been a completely separate piece of fabric from the skirt entirely that she would have pinned to her waistline and draped over and pinned a corner to the back of her skirt. So this was a completely separate piece of fabric from the rest of the skirt, meant to create a lot of dimension in her skirt. Another really popular fashion choice of this time period were high necklines or high collars. They often had a ruffle with the high collars. You can see with Ida Field McKay in the second picture, and also with August Matilda Hench in the last picture. Their sleeves were fitted or straight. They ended at or just before the wrists that had a ruffle or a cuff. You can see examples of ruffles in the first three pictures and a cuff in the last picture. Their bodices ended at the hips or lower, so they didn't end up here. They ended closer to your natural hip, or they went all the way down past your upper thigh. You can see that in the second picture, again with Ida Field McKay. Hers goes all the way down past her thighs, and then also with Mary Eliza Armstrong. The mid to late 1880s starts a fashion of intense bustling. It was a lobster tail was the first time that had showed up, and it created these kind of shelves in their skirts where they would have jutted out at a 90-degree angle. Really silly, but you can see it in the first three pictures especially. Belle McKay and Lily Robertson, they're great side profiles of those skirts. The bodices and skirts were mostly two pieces. There were very few examples of whole dresses during this time period. And they were never mixed and matched. Even though they were two separate pieces, the bodices always went with the same skirt every time. You would never be caught mixing and matching that stuff. So from our collection, we have some really cool pieces in this time period. Shug is wearing a late 1880s daytime ensemble. She's actually got a lobster tail underneath that skirt, so that is the silhouette it would create underneath the skirt. This is one of the few complete ensembles we have in the collection. It is ruffled and pleated taffeta in a deep purple and gray-green with a matching jacket. The jacket includes one small purple pocket on the left side. The skirt also has a built-in pocket. The jacket also has 13 knit-covered buttons down the front. It's trimmed on the hem, cuffs, and neck with the same purple that is featured in the skirt. And unfortunately, it's in great condition, but it's terribly pit-stained because they were not taking showers back then. And they were not doing their laundry either. So next up, we have Jolie in an 1880 Paisley wedding ensemble. This is actually my favorite ensemble in the whole collection. When I saw it for the first time, I actually saw it in the catalog before I saw it in person, and I had to find it. It was lost in a box somewhere. So I made it my mission to find it, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys once she gets out here. But it is a beautiful, beautiful piece that we actually have provenience for, which is really incredible. This dress was worn by Susan Winiger on her wedding day in April 1880. This gown is from 1880. She was 30 years old. Her husband, John L. March, was 49. They lived on Table Mountain Ranch near Murphy's, and John was a partner in a grocery general store in Murphy's. This dress is actually two pieces. It's a bodice top and a skirt. It is lined with purple silk, and it's paisley patterned. The skirt's top layer is actually part of the bodice. So the bodice is bustled in both front and back. It's really neat. The bodice top is lined with gold and purple fringe, and there are 17 enamel, hand-painted, and opal inset buttons down the front, and then 3 on each wrist cuff. Like I said, it's my favorite piece. And then next up, we have Jill. Jill is in, unfortunately, just a skirt, no bodice. We don't have that one. So it is a pleated, ruffled 1880s brown bustle skirt. She's also wearing a lobster tail under that. You can see we've made an extender for her in the back of the skirt because these women had extremely tiny waists. So it is brown silk in both warm and cool tones, which is an interesting color choice. You don't usually mix your warm and cool tones, but this skirt has both warm brown and cool brown. So the next era I would like to talk about is 1890 to 1904, and this is the end of the Gilded Age and turn of the century. The major events that happened in this time period, in 1890, it was announced by the US government that there are no longer any unsettled frontiers in America. In 1890 also, Yosemite becomes the country's second national park. And in 1893, there is a panic. Technically, it was a depression, but they call it a panic. It was so long, it was from 1893 to 1897, and it was caused by the crashing international markets and the ensuing bank runs. In the 1898 to 1899 was the Spanish-American War, and then 1899 to 1902 is the Philippine-American War. These wars of colonization back-to-back ended the panics, depression, so there was no more of that. And then in 1902, Bret Hart passes away. So this is a really fun era of clothing. The bustle and ruffles and pleats pretty much disappear. You do still see it sometimes, but you don't ever see bustles anymore at this stage. They still had high collars and necklines, just this time with less ruffle. And their bodices ended at the hip. They no longer extended past the hip. In the mid-90s, the sleeves begin to get larger to compensate for the lost volume in the skirts. And the shoulder volume, it got larger as the 1900s got closer, even bigger. They actually had these things called shoulder puffs that we don't have in the collection, but they're like hoop skirts for your shoulder puffs. They're really interesting. And then in this era, early 1900s, the Gibson girl image appears, which you'll notice that all of our models are wearing a pseudo-Gibson hairstyle. The skirt and blouse, notice how I said blouse instead of bodice, are visibly two pieces, enabling mixing and matching. So they have gone from these tight fitted jackets to now more flowy shirts, tops, kind of blouses. As you can see in all of these pictures, there's a lot of room in those sleeves. The belt returns after the 1860s and emerges the bump pad. So that bump pad you saw Jolie wearing earlier, its time to shine. From our collection, we have Shug in an early 1900s lawn gown with 1900s silk parasol and trim. So this dress is partially handmade, partially machine made. It is white cotton with lace details. It hooks up the back, and it has elbow-length sleeves with a small ruffle at the elbow. Lawn dresses are short for lingerie dresses because they were translucent and delicate fabrics, and it showed more of the undergarment than they had ever seen in the past, so they were called lawn dresses for short for lingerie. Next, we have Jolie in an early 1900s black striped lawn skirt and a late 1890s black blouse. Both of these objects have provenience, which is excellent. They were both owned by Annie Hay Williams of Murphy's, which means she could have worn these two pieces together, which is really exciting. Thank you, Shug, for walking down with your parasol. The blouse has two sets of closures, buttons on the inside and hooks and eyes on the outside. And the skirt would have been worn over a black petticoat, but because the detail of the design is so beautiful, I wanted you guys to see it with a white underskirt so you guys can really see what it looks like. So the next era we're going to talk about is 1905 to 1915. This is pre-Great War or World War I. The major events that happened in this time period: in 1906, the San Francisco earthquake and fires occurred. In 1907, there was another panic. The stock market fell by 50% and again caused bank runs. Mark Twain passes away in 1910, and then in 1911, Californian women are granted the right to vote equally with men. Up until this point, the women of California did not have the vote. So you'll notice after this point that you will see their fashion really start to change, as you can imagine. So this era is described with a lot of lighter, gauzier, more airy fabrics. It's very similar to the two pieces you've already seen in the collection and some of the pictures we saw in the last era, but there is some overlap and some change. It was a visible shirt, blouse, and skirt look. They still had bump pads. Their skirts either were straight or they had trains. As you can see in the first picture with Ollie Martin, she has a beautiful ruffled trim. And as you can see in the third picture, Carrie Mae Ross, she has a more straight skirt. The volume moved from the upper sleeve to the lower sleeve, down by the wrists, as you can see in that first picture. And then they either wore high collars or off the shoulders. Post-1910, we see a lot more asymmetrical designs and details, as you can see in that first picture of Carrie Danielson. These designs were very reminiscent of Cubism. It's a popular art style in that time period, and you can really see its influence on fashion. Shortening of the skirt begins after 1910, shorter as 1920 approached, and especially in working women. As women's rights move forward, women's fashion, if we continue to look into the future, relaxes in both fit and severity as freedoms increase. Post-1910, corsets began to fall out of fashion, or they were replaced with more comfortable corsets that allowed for more movement. They pretty much got rid of the petticoats, got rid of the bustles, anything that was cumbersome and difficult to move in. They got rid of it because they needed to work and move. Crazy. That is my entire presentation, but I am so sad to say goodbye. I'm already mourning. I think we should cue the Victorian sobbing, crying Victorians. Oh, so sad. I know. It's so sad. What are we gonna do? So really quickly, Shug is wearing an 1890s black blouse that you saw just a bit earlier, an 1890s black silk skirt, and an 1890s to 1900s black velvet jacket. Jill is wearing an 1850s to 1860s black silk dress, an 1850s black silk cape, and then Miss Jolie here is wearing an 1890s black skirt and 1880s, 1890s black taffeta blouse. Oh, now she's crying because she has to walk by herself. That's so sad. I want to give a special thank you to my models, Jill, Shug, and Jolie. She is not here tonight, but I'm also going to thank Cindy Clorer. She's the Executive Artistic Director of Fourth Wall and the owner of this building. Thank you so much, Cindy, for letting us use the space. I'd like to thank Lauren Ramirez, if she can pop out from the dressing room. She was my historical costuming and integrity consultant. And Beth Brandt, my stage manager, helping the girls get changed back there. Thank you so much, Missy and Nikki back at the bar for bartending for us. They're getting you guys all lubed up. And then finally, all photos I used in my presentation are courtesy of CCHS County Society and Museums. And thank you guys so much.